Well, after months of fierce legal wrangling, President Donald Trump's second attempt to ban refugees and immigrants from several mostly Muslim countries recently went into limited effect. People from 6 nations targeted in the ban, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, can only enter the country if they have a proven bona fide relationship with either a family member or an approved entity here in the U.S.
Now, as the Supreme Court prepares to hear arguments in October on the scope of presidential power over border security and immigration, the future for many immigrants and refugees remains clouded in uncertainty. Joining us today is Albert Cahn, the legal director at the Council on American-Islamic Relations of New York. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we're also happy to welcome, for the first time, David Bazargan, an Iranian-American immigration attorney right here in New York.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Gentlemen, this band, it just goes around and around and around
like
and around. Exactly. Albert, how is the revised order different from the original order?
Yeah, this has been a pretty lengthy saga. You go back to the original order, and it was pretty just jaw-droppingly extreme. You had the president not just blocking visa holders, but blocking long-term permanent residents, green card holders who had, built businesses here, had families here, had lives here, who considered New York their home. And these people are being told, no, you can't come back. And so that order was struck down very quickly. And in a further attempt to keep out Muslim immigrants and Muslim New Yorkers, people who consider this city their home, the president had Muslim Ban 2, which was limited to those individuals who didn't already have a visa. So it carved out those people who had a green card, those people who had a second passport from Canada or the UK. It really tried to have a much narrower focus, but even that order was struck down as unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has allowed that order to partially go back into effect. And I want to make it clear, the bona fide relationship test does not apply across the board. That is only for those people otherwise covered by this fairly limited but incredibly unconstitutional order.
So I want to go to the other lawyer now and find out what it means to have a bona fide relationship as the perimeters of this order come down. What does that mean for you?
Sure, good question. Basically, the first order didn't really define what kind of bona fide relationship means as far as the family or the business. Right. The second one, it's a little bit more clear. It defines, for instance, as far as the family, clearly says like parents, children, and it certainly cut out people like cousins, grandparents, and all this thing. But when you talk about the business or entity, it still is very vague. You don't know. I mean, once they say like a bona fide entity relationship, what kind of visa are affected? What kind of visa are not affected? Right. So it still is vague, and also at the same time, it's going to give full discretion to CBP officer to basically decide based on his own decision that this is not a bona fide relationship as far as the entity, or this is actually bona fide. So it still is vague. But again, these two, I mean, as far as the family, it's kind of like a clear cut right now. Right. You can say, because it's clear to you when you want to apply for your grandparents, you're going to say, okay, grandparents is not covered. It's not bona fide.
What's the hashtag, Aaron?
Well, they're about to show the hashtag right now, but I want to say it doesn't include grandparents, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, and fiancés, as well as other extended family members.
So the hashtag is grandparents not terrorists.
Right,
that I was referring to, that's been trending all over the place.
Though we need to point out, the Supreme Court came up with this standard of bona fide relationship, and they laid out a few benchmarks. They said, a mother-in-law is clearly a bona fide relationship. And then the Trump administration, like they constantly do, tried to push back, tried to push this to the limits, and said grandparents aren't included. The Supreme Court never decided that. He said that fiancés weren't included. The Supreme Court never decided that either. And you actually saw attorneys going back to the courts and saying, this administration is not only breaking the law, it's in contempt of the Supreme Court, and you should allow fiancés in. And that one the Trump administration has agreed to.
So, David, looking at the landscape on the immigration front and people legally going through every step to come to the States, I wonder before and after this, if security, you think, was the paramount issue when people were applying, whether it was in the Obama era versus the Trump era, when you have to fill out all these things to come to the States?
Sure. Well, basically, the main issue with this, the travel ban 1 or travel ban 2, is that it's not fit to its purpose. So if the purpose of all these travel bans is the security of the people, we can argue that this is way too broad. And also, there's so many countries that they have people. I mean, first of all, there's no supporting documents as far as the people from this country. If you have issue with the governments of this country, that's a different story. But the people of this country, for instance, Iranian, they've never been part of a terrorist in United States. It's really hard to find out supporting evidence for these kind of travel bans. Second thing is that there are some other people from other countries that they've been involved in terrorist act, but they're not included in this thing. So it's really hard to buy this argument that all these travel bans, the main purpose is basically to promote the security and safety of the people of the United States.
Well, it's verified that since 9/11, these attacks that have happened have been perpetrated by United States citizens within
legal
the boundaries
residents.
of the homeland,
exactly.
as it were.
So I don't know how far this would go to necessarily keep us safe. I do have to ask, what do you think the future of refugee settlement in the United States looks like now in the wake of this ban?
Well, the ban originally tried to cut down the number of refugees being resettled in the United States from 120,000 to 50,000. And the ban also tried to put a 120-day freeze on refugee resettlement. Now, the court order does allow refugees into the United States if they continue to have this bona fide relationship we keep talking about. But who doesn't have a bona fide relationship? These are young children who are orphans. These are people who've lost their families in conflict. These are the people who our country should be open to and who should find a safe haven and a new life. And those are the people who are most being targeted. It's also unclear whether the Trump administration will try to enforce this 50,000 person cap, which if they did, would put an end to all refugee resettlement for the year.
What about the 120-day thing? Because I know there was some back and forth over whether the clock was stopped at this certain point when it went to the Supremes, and now the Trump administration would like to resume it, or if the clock was running. Is there a definitive answer on that?
The Trump administration had a memorandum back in June that said that the clock is measured from the date that a stay is lifted. So when the stay was lifted on June 26th, that's when the clock restarted. They then had 72 hours under this presidential memorandum before the order went back into effect. But that's when we're measuring it from. And the Trump administration repeatedly said in multiple court filings that they still need this window. They still need this 120-day pause. They still need this 90-day pause.
Okay. So what are the real-world implications right now? If someone comes into your office and they're trying to get their fiance or whatever,
niece or nephew,
or the grandmother who raised them, which so often happens a block from here or around the world. So what are the real-world implications?
Well, the thing is, even before all these travel bans, they were like vetting, security checks, and everything. So what they add right now is just like a complete block. So before, a grandma, for instance, if she wanted to come to the United States, she had to go through all these security, FBI check, and everything. Now she can't even apply. So the main issue is that many of these people in the United States, they have single entry visa. They can't even go and see their grandparents. So the issue is that they're not going to see each other for many years. So for instance, most Iranian here, they have, under any kind of visa, they have single entry, meaning that if they leave the United States, they have to go through the embassy, get their new visa, and come back. And there's a chance they're going to lose their visa. So there are so many Iranians in the United States under any kind of visa that they haven't seen their parents for many years.
Well, one of the articles I was reading, it was saying that so far as education is concerned, a big factor in students choosing what country or what school they want to go to is the ability of their family, their extended family, to visit them. And then so once again, this will have huge implications for American universities as well.
Definitely. I mean, this is something that has made America only a better country over, the past decades, over the past centuries. People coming here to study, to build a life, to bring their families, to build up their capacity for what they can do, but also to enrich our culture, to enrich our economy, and to make us what we've always aspired to be, an open society for all.
So for people right now that are still very confused, how do they reach out to your office and get the assistance that they need?
Well, basically how they do it is that we try to basically come up with the solution. So the first question they have, we're going to ask them, is it like a family you're going to bring, or it's someone that you're going to bring based on like a business? Mm-hmm. So the first thing we're going to basically pick up a path. You're going to say, okay, you're going to bring the family. Now, if you want to bring your cousin, it's impossible to bring it. Mm-hmm. So, but if you are going under any kind of visa, employment-based, green card, and everything, we have to discuss. Before when we start everything, we have to know what kind of business this is, and also what kind of person, what kind of beneficiary you have. So it's going to add a lot more than before. So it's not.
I just wanted to know, Albert, you talked about, Trump expanding the scope past what the Supremes had laid out, but there are some states, including Hawaii and other cluster of states, who are pushing back, trying to get the scope of the thing wide or narrowed. So they broaden. They're resistant.
They're trying to shrink the Muslim ban by expanding the scope of the injunction.
Okay.
And so that is going to be probably a tension point throughout, because you have this fairly broad standard by the Supreme Court, right. And so you're going to have lawyers for the states pushing back and saying, no, the way the Department of Justice, the way the Department of State are applying this is not consistent with what the Supreme Court had in mind.
What about New York State specifically?
New York State has filed amicus briefs in some of these cases. I don't know if they're a party to any of the lawsuits. Okay. I know that A.G. Schneiderman his office has been very supportive of the Muslim community during this whole episode, but people have to realize this is just a preliminary decision. We are going to see full arguments on this case in the next term. We're going to have a full decision on the merits. And the Trump administration was quick to paint this as a victory. And it was a temporary victory, but they haven't won the fight yet. And the Supreme Court is a long way from saying that this order is lawful or non-discriminatory.
Well, they painted it as a unanimous Supreme Court victory.
And it was in a very minor way. But there's a very big difference between winning the fight over a preliminary injunction, the fight over what happens just in these next few months, and winning the final decision about was the president acting beyond his powers as commander-in-chief and violating the U.S. Constitution. That's a very serious decision, and that's one we're going to see later this year or early next year.
So how's it going to go, David?
Well, honestly, it's hard to predict from now, but based on the new judge in the Supreme Court, there is a chance that the merit, they're gonna accept that. They're gonna say, okay, I assume not all of them, but some part of it the Supreme Court, they may agree.
You concur?
I think there's a long history of lawyers trying to predict the Supreme Court and getting it wrong. And no, David is as good as anyone when it comes to his prediction. But I think the reality is we don't know. We saw a unanimous decision, but that unanimous decision hinted at a deep divisions.
Right.
Yeah. And I expect that we're going to see a lot of variation on how people come out based off of, direct family, extended family versus people who have no direct connection to U.S. citizens. It's going to get into very complicated areas of federalism, questions of that go to the heart of how our courts operate, but are very they're not the most user-friendly parts of the law to get into.
Okay, we'll be watching.
Yeah, they may shape it somehow, but yeah. Even like the preliminary injunction that they had, most people, Supreme Court, they're not going to accept that, but they did. So
we shall see.
Yeah, we shall see.
We shall see. Exciting times we're living in.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.